everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We will be doing a methodology breakdown of gold standards methodology for carbon sequestration through accelerated carbonation of concrete aggregate. So before we begin going into methodology specifics, let's do a quick overview of who we are. Envision Blockchain Solutions builds application for the Web3 space, and we focus on guiding organizations through three major milestones of their Web3 journey: use case analysis, proof of concept development, and scale deployments. We're also the builders and maintainers of the Guardian, which we'll be showing today. So as you may know, the process of designing and collecting the supporting data for carbon claims is heavily manual and prone to errors. This can be due to a variety of factors, including poor data quality, a lack of assurance, potential double counting, greenwashing, and just an overall lack of trust. The Guardian is here to address these issues by leveraging a cutting-edge policy workflow engine. The Guardian can mirror the standards and business requirements of regulatory bodies, creating extremely flexible digital methodologies known as DMRV. This approach not only helps organizations ensure compliance with regulatory requirements, but it also enables them to streamline their carbon accounting processes, improve data quality, and reduce the risk of errors and inaccuracies. You could also think of a policy inside of the Guardian as a digital version of a methodology. And by using the policy workflow blocks like Legos, you could design your desired workflow. To the right, you could see an example of that, and we'll also be showing the one for the methodology we're looking at today when we do the demo. And at the heart of this ecosystem are four key technologies that enable us to deliver trusted and transparent solutions for the carbon market. So first, we have W3C decentralized identifiers, also known as DIDs. DIDs are globally unique IDs that allow individuals and organizations to generate their own identifiers using systems they trust. By using DIDs, we can ensure that carbon credits are issued to the correct party and that they cannot be duplicated or manipulated in any way. Second, we use verifiable credentials, VCs. VCs are a digital document that provide information related to the subject, the issuing authority, the type of credential, and specific attributes of the subject. It also provides evidence related to how the credential was derived. By using VCs, we can ensure that carbon credits are issued only to those who meet the necessary criteria and that the credits themselves are valid and trustworthy. We also use verifiable presentations, and VPs are a collection of one or more VCs. And here to the right, you can see our trust chain. This is where you can see all the VC files. You'll see who did a specific action, what that action was. And by opening up, you'll see all the information that was submitted by that party. So now we could go into a recap of our past webinars. Each webinar focuses on a specific methodology from our open source library, and it's aimed at helping our users and anyone interested in the Guardian to understand how these methodologies can be streamlined for efficient implementation. We've covered methodologies from Vera, Gold Standard, and CDM, and you can find videos for each one of these at the Envision Blockchain YouTube channel. Here you'll also see a list of all the ones that are currently in our open source library. These are a few others. Now we'll go over our policy development checklist. So in this slide, we'll discuss the essential steps that you can take to create a policy for the Guardian. And creating a well-defined policy is crucial for effectively implementing the Guardian tool into your projects. So let's go through each step together. Step one is going to be to identify the standard and an appropriate methodology. So you want to begin by identifying the relevant standard and methodology that aligns with your project's goals and their requirements. This will serve as the foundation for developing your policy. Step two would be to review the standard and any methodology documents. So you'll want to make sure you read through the documentation provided by the standard and the methodology that they have, ensuring that there's a comprehensive understanding of their guidelines, the criteria, and any principles. So to the right here, you'll see some registries like Vera, Gold Standard, IREC, and CDM. They all have a library of methodologies that you could look through and pick whichever one relates to your project. Then you want to identify roles, processes, and requirements. By identifying the various roles involved, you'll be able to define the responsibilities and list that out in the Guardian when you go into the workflow engine. Then you want to determine the necessary processes and requirements outlined by that standard. Step 4 is to identify any input parameters and equations. So understand the specific input parameters and equations used in that methodology. These will be essential for accurately calculating and reporting the correct values. If you're using a policy in our open source library, then the equations will just need to be filled out using our form in order for them to be auto-calculated. But if you're creating a new policy, that'll be a bit different since you'll have to map out all the equations using a program like Excel spreadsheets. And then you could use the policy configurator and build out that workflow. Then step 5 is to create a workflow and a schema. This is where you want to develop a clear workflow and the schema that outlines a step-by-step process for using the Guardian. And this again applies to the policy configurator. And finally, you'll be able to build the policy for the Guardian. So going into the methodology that we're breaking down today is focused on accelerated carbonation of concrete aggregate. And this gold standard methodology has two processes that you can select, which include a direct approach and an indirect approach. The direct approach is a process that imitates natural weathering, but it accelerates the rate, while the indirect process extracts and carbonate cement phases. Both processes lead to the permanent storage of CO2 as a calcium carbonate, which results in a negative greenhouse gas emissions, which is also contributing to climate change mitigation. The methodology generates calcium carbonate as a raw material, aligning with sustainability goals in the construction industry, and promotes efficient carbon sequestration as well as supporting environmentally friendly construction practices. So, a little bit about accelerated carbonation. Through the applied processes of carbonation, concrete aggregate is exposed to an increased concentration of CO2, making it react with the cement, which contains calcium oxides to form stable carbonate minerals, enabling the sequestration process. So if you've ever reached for a Tums when you experience heartburn, that was calcium carbonate working some magic. Carbonation is also a natural process. It provides long-term storage, therefore reducing the carbon footprint associated with different activities, and provides sustainable building materials when used as an aggregate for cement. So how do we calculate the emission reductions? First, we'll look at the project boundary, and this comes directly from the methodology itself. We could look at this chart and see what's included in the project boundary and what is associated with leakage. So in blue, you'll see what is included in the leakage emissions, so things like CO2 capture, separation and collection, liquefaction, transportation of that aggregate, and a few other activities will be accounted for in the leakage emissions. Then in green, we have the project emissions like mineral carbonation, any solvent that was used, and evaporation. Then at the bottom, you'll see some examples of where that product is used. Landfill, concrete production, road construction, and other applications as well. Then here we see the final equation within the methodology, and it applies to all the calculation approaches. So the direct one or the indirect, it'll also take into account project emissions and any leakage emissions. So here we see the emission reductions are calculated by subtracting the project sinks from the project emissions, and then we subtract the leakage emissions. This will give us the tons of CO2 reduced by the project activities and will then reflect as the number of tokens minted. So now we could look at the schema and workflow. This is an example of the schema design for this specific methodology, and we're going to go ahead and look at that Excel. So as you can see, it looks a little different than the ones that we previously had if you're familiar with those. And the reasoning for this is to make it a bit easier for a user to input their data if you want to go ahead and test it in the Excel, and then input into the Guardian. So this is just an instructions sheet. Then we have our project details, which is always the first schema that we begin with. So the user would fill all this out, and it relates to their project, the project location, any dates that are specific to that project, like when it began, when they had the design certification, what methodology they're using, and other information. Then we have our baseline or project sinks in this case. And here you'll see the calculations are still in green when it's auto-calculated. You see the equations up here. You can also select which one applies to your project. So for the scenario today, we're going to stay with Exanti. We have our project sinks here again, and you'll see that we have it listed out as which ones are required. So if I were to change this, you'll see that now this section is not required. You don't need to input data there. You can also select here to input all the information that you have in all your data and get some calculations at the very top. We could also change the year to get a calculation for a specific year instead of a total. And then we have ex post. So if you were to select ex post, you'd be filling out this table. If it's direct and indirect, we have our project emissions. Again, you can select which option applies to your project. And you'll see all these questions asked in the Guardian form in the same order as well. And again, you'll see which ones are required, which ones are not required. You can always select these buttons and fill out your information. And we have that for leakage. Leakage has many different activities that are included. So it's going to be a long form, but we've separated them into different sheets where you can input your data. Then we have our emission reductions. And you can always select here to go back to a specific area. So your project sinks, your project emissions, any leakage emissions, and your total emission reductions. And then we have tool 2 included. This is going to be the old format that we used to have. This is more of a questionnaire type, so there's going to be no calculations in this. But you'll see that we'll fill this out as the first thing that we see in our project form today. Now we have our gold standard workflow. So we're going to have different roles like the project proponent, the VVB, registry, and our technical advisory committee, as well as NGO supporters. So the first thing is we're going to start from this side. We have the project proponent creates a project and submits the project form. Then the VVB will register their account. The registry will review and add the project to the project pipeline. Then they'll also review the VVB and approve their account. Then the project proponent will assign the project to an approved VVB. The VVB now has access to that VC document, which they can review and approve or reject the project. The Technical Advisory Committee and NGO supporters both have access to the project's VC documents for commenting purposes. The project proponent will then create and submit a monitoring report, which the VVB can then verify. And lastly, the registry will review the verified report and mint token. So now that we went over the Excel design and the workflow, you can see how we turn a methodology into a digital policy with the Guardian. So by using the information from the methodology PDF, we can design an Excel that reflects all the decisions a user needs to make and add the calculations in order to streamline this tedious process into a simple form that only requires data. And now let's go do a demo. We're going to be doing a demo of Managed Guardian Service today. And we'll be looking at this policy in there as well. So as you can see, we have a new UI. We have everything organized here to the left, which all of this can be customized. The logo could be placed here. You could change this text in the admin account, and you can also change colors. So we'll start from the very beginning. This is my profile here. We can go into the Policies tab, click that drop down, and open the schemas. We can see our policy schemas, module schemas, tag schemas, system schemas, and any tool schemas. So this one's going to be specific for the policy we were going over. You'll see we have a total of 25. and we see some for emission reductions, leakage. So let's open one up. You'll see we have the Simplified tab and Advanced. So if we scroll down, we see the descriptions, which will be the same as what you saw in the Excel. You can see that we have the field types, if it's required or not required, or if it should be hidden. If we want to allow multiple answers, and then here we have an enum of yes or no, so it's probably for one of the drop downs that we had in the Excel. Now if we go to Advanced, you'll see we have the field name, which is used when we do our workflow blocks. You can also select the default verifiable credential or encrypted verifiable credential. So let's select this just to show you. And now we can make some of these private. So if this were an address that maybe you don't want to disclose, then you can go ahead and select private and go ahead and have that encrypted. So let's click cancel. We have tabs for artifacts, modules, and policies. And we also have it for tools. So here you see we have tool 2, which I showed you in the Excel that we'll be using today. So let's go back to the policies. And we're going to go ahead and click on this right here, which is our policy configurator, where you can go ahead and edit. So now you see all the workflow blocks. And this is going to follow that same workflow that we had. If you start opening them up, you see everything that's been added. We can open up the project proponents, look at the projects. And then for new project, you'll see that we have the tool in there as well as this calculation block. And in there would be all the JavaScript for that calculation. We also have the modules right here and the tool. So again, you'll see that we have tool 2. So we'll be looking at the gold standard carbon sequestration policy. You can see it's already in a dry run version. If we click here, you can also stop, and that's how you can edit them. If it's in dry run, you won't be able to edit. And then you can also publish that policy. So let's go ahead and click register, and we're going to start that workflow that I showed you in the presentation. So we're going to start by creating users. We're going to create 4 users. So we have 3. All right, so the administrator is going to be our standard registry. We can go ahead and click virtual user 1 and assign a role to them. So we can click project proponent for this user. Now you see they have tabs like projects, monitoring reports, tokens, and they can also create a project here. So now let's go to virtual user 2 and assign their role. We're going to assign the VBB. And we're just going to name this as the VBB for this example. We're going to go to user 3, assign it to the technical advisory committee, which will be commenting. And the same thing for the last user, which is the NGO supporters. They're also going to have the functionality of commenting once we submit the project. All All right, so we can go to the administrator and go ahead and approve the VBB. So you see the tab here says approve VBB. We have operations to approve or reject. And you can also open this document here, which is a VC document. And you see the information we provided about the VBB. So let's go ahead and click approve. And then we're going to create our project. So we're going back to the project proponent. You can see that here. And select new project. So I'm going to go ahead and open the Excel so I could keep track of the data that I'm inserting. All right, so we're going to start with selecting if this is a real case VPA or regular. We're just going to select real case. What's the scale? Microscale. And then we're going to start putting in some information. So all of this is for demo purposes, but it's going to look similar to what you would usually put in. So you see the GS, and it would normally follow by a number, which is the ID for that project. Then we're going to give them information about the type of project that we're doing, the location, the coordinates, which you can go ahead and select which one would make sense for the coordinates that you're providing. I'm going to select point. And then we're going to put in the date for submission date. We're just going to use November 1st of 2022. Date of design certification, the version number, completion of that version. These are all the company that's in charge of this project, the host country, we'll say this is not applicable. And now we can select the activity requirements that were applied. For this case, it was land use and forestry activities, or risk and capacities. And then here you could explain what your SDGs were. So we have 13, 9, and 8 just for this example. A description of the project. We'll also state non-applicable here. What technologies were used. Here we're going to describe the scale. Any funding sources. And if you had any further information, you could provide it here. We'll put NA. And now we can start with tool 2. So this is for additionality. You will go ahead and answer each question. So we'll select yes. And you'll see it says the project activity is additional, and now you would provide information, which usually you'll see that this is in a paragraph form. So we'll go ahead and just put this as an example for each one. And you'll see it describes what step it is you're providing information for. You can always add more if you click Add Field. So if maybe you had a really long explanation and you might want to separate it, that's when you can use this button. And then we're at the baseline emissions. So I'm going to state that this data belongs to 2022. I need to write what information I have about the material type. So what am I using? The first one's going to be limestone. The grain size, you could go ahead and select one of these. I'm going to select 4 to 8. And then we're going to put information about where we source this data from. We'll say it was a forecast. And go ahead and add another one. This is also for 2022. But this is for gravel, so the material type is going to be different. And then our grain size is larger than 22. And again, this is going to be a forecast. So now we can go to the project emissions. We're going to say it's direct mineral carbonation. Select yes. And insert the data you have for each one of these. And we're going to go ahead and click Add Entity so we can fill out some other data points here. So we have project emissions from fuel consumption. This also belongs to 2022. The type of fuel that was used is going to be natural gas. And now we're going to do one for coal. Then we can move into leakage. And by following each one of these headers, if you're using Excel, you could go ahead and find that section in Excel as well and keep track of all the data that you're inserting. We're going to go ahead and keep adding. So for this example, we have 7 activities. We're going to add 2 more. So we're at activity 6. And our last one. And you want to make sure all the data you're putting in too is dependent on that same year. So as you can see, everything we've been filling out is for the year 2022. So as you can see, I'm putting 0 for these. In this case, it's because these activities don't apply to this project. All right, and now we could go ahead and select Create. All right, so we see it says waiting to be added. We're going to go ahead and go back to the administrator, select Project Pipeline, and now we see a button here that says Add. So now the registry can go ahead and open this VC document and see all the information that we just filled out. It's also going to have all the calculations that happen that in the Excel you'll see is green, which are auto-calculated. You'll see all of those in here. So as you can see, this one would be an example of one that was auto-calculated and we didn't fill out. It's just using all the data that we provided to get those calculations through. And then we can select Add. Now we're going to go back to the project proponent and assign the VVB. So you see that we have one here. If you had multiple VVBs to choose from, you'll see that list. So we're going to select this one. Then go to the VVB's account. Select projects. And they also get to see that same document with all the data, all the auto calculations. It's all going to reflect here. And then we're going to select validate. We're going to approve this again. So now that we've approved it, we could go back to that account I was just in, which is user 3, and that's the technical advisory committee. And you'll see that they have this operation now where they can comment. So they're going to see that same document. They could go ahead and review it. And if they have any comments that they'd like to provide, they could go ahead and leave that here. The same applies for the NGO supporters. They could go ahead and open this up and leave a comment. So now we're going to go ahead and submit our monitoring report. We're just going to leave all the data that we already provided, but usually you would go ahead and update this with real project information. So anything that you've been monitoring, you'll see those parameters described within the methodology of the ones that need to be changed and how often you have to change them. So you might see some that require you to update it every year, and some might require every 5 years. So it's very dependent on what they specify. So we're back in the VVB account. And the VVB now can see that monitoring report by clicking that View Document button, and we're going to select Verify. And now we're going to go back to the administrator. We're going to select Monitoring Reports. They can also view that monitoring report, and then they can select Approve or Reject. We're going to select Approve. And now we see this Mint button, so we're going to go ahead and click that. We see that the tokens have been minted. We can click Token History. And here we have our VP. So we see the visual presentation, the verified presentation with the token, the recipient. We also have the verified signature, the policy that we used, what version it's in, and then we see the trust chain all the way at the bottom. So we can see every step that we took, who took that step, and the VC file for that. So we started with creating the policy. We see the automatic completion of the project fields, which we could go ahead and open that up and see all the information that we submitted. The project validation, approving it all the way to the end where we got to mint. And keep in mind, we are in a dry run setting. And then we can see this file here as well. Thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you here again next month.